Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It is Tuesday, the 16th of January, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Now, Sean, this week's shows are slightly shorter than usual, and next week we'll be back with the full-length bulletins and interviews every day, and the weekend edition and the week ahead with Stephen Koukoulas and basically everything. But this week, slightly shorter episodes because the news cycle is just kind of picking up and everyone's kind of getting back to work and all of these business stories are starting to emerge. In the meantime, though, Sean, still some good stories to discuss. The owner of Rebel, Supercheap Auto, Macpac and BCF yesterday announced strong Christmas trading with a jump in sales for the December half, but Chief Executive Anthony Albanese warned rising wages and rents will hit profit margins.
Yeah, very interesting. The preliminary first half revenue for Super Retail Group was $2 billion and the first half profit before tax was about $200 million, touch over, across the 700 stores of those retailers. The news sent its share price up 6% yesterday, something of a surprise. People didn't expect such a strong result. Some of the other retailers benefited as well. Premier Group, for example, it owns Smiggles, Just Jeans, Peter Alexander, among others. Its share price was up more than 4%. Super Retail Group's biggest brand is Supercheap Auto. It showed sales growth of 4%, but the star was BCF, where turnover climbed 8%. At Macpac, sales were flat, and at Rebel, they fell a touch. Now, Mr. Herity warned that the end of the half year was much tougher than earlier. So what he was really saying is they had a great Black Friday, great Cyber Monday, but things did actually slow towards the end of the year, Christmas, post-Christmas sales, that type of thing.
Yeah, and that's what the CommBank Household Spending Insights Index, which was released yesterday, that seemed to show that as well.
Yeah, exactly right. The big banks, and Commonwealth Bank's the biggest, of course, get all this data from spending on credit and debit cards. So they have a pretty good inkling about what's going on the ground. The index fell sharply last month as successive interest rate hikes and the pull forward of spending on Black Friday, Cyber Monday hit retailers. There were falls in spending on recreation, food and beverage and hospitality. Offsetting the declines were increases in spending on transport, insurance and health. If you think about that, what went down is all the good stuff. Recreation, food and beverage, hospitality. What went up is sort of the necessities of life. Things like insurance, health. A bit boring, Michael. But that seems to be where we're at. With all these interest rate hikes recently, cost of living pressures, it really is biting into the economy. We're seeing that at retailers. We're seeing it in inflation numbers. I just reckon there's going to be more and more talk of rate cuts later in the year, Michael.
Sean, you mentioned Supercheap Auto and the Super Retail Group, obviously. Now, I had a little encounter with the Super Retail Group and particularly Supercheap Auto. And I'm not surprised that they've actually had a good run because it feels like customer service is something that they've really kind of nailed. Can I tell you why?
Yeah, go on.
Because you would probably know from doing this podcast that I have very few skills in terms of practical DIY or anything like that. And so I needed some new windscreen wipers. And so I went into Supercheap Auto and I said, I don't know what I'm looking for. They helped me find exactly what I needed. And then they said, for like $3 extra, we can install them for you. You've saved me about 6.5 hours trying to figure out how to do it. Yes. Anyway, something like the ones that I'd picked weren't right. And so the manager of the store and another person were both out there and they had every different brand available and they went out the back and they installed all of them, tested them all. I backed out into the rain and then drove back in and we compared kind of the results on all of them. In the end, they picked the ones that suited best for the vehicle. I paid for those ones and drove off. It was the best customer experience I've had in a very, very long time. So I've hijacked the show, but just to say, not surprised that Super Retail Group had a good result because they are winning on customer service.
Excellent. I love hearing those stories.
And they're not advertisers, but after that, they probably should be. All right, moving on. Sean, what happened in financial markets over the last 24 hours or so?
The local market closed down just 2 points yesterday to 7,496 points. It remains close to record highs, though. Now, volumes are pretty low at the moment, not helped by the time of year. And, of course, overnight, Wall Street was closed due to the Martin Luther King holiday. Energy stocks did well, as did uranium stocks. Again, there's been a long rally in uranium stocks. In fact, uranium futures are heading towards $100 a pound. Uranium hasn't been at this sort of level since 2007, ahead of the crash then. The reason is that as the world pushes to go green, nuclear power is again coming into fashion, and some of the local producers are doing really well. Boss Energy, for example, it's listed on the ASX. It's up nearly 40% this year. We're talking about 2 weeks, 40% this year. Paladin Energy, it's up more than 30%. Something in the water, which is probably not what you should say when you're talking about uranium stocks. Anyway, another interesting stock yesterday was Qantas, closing down nearly 4.5% after it emerged that the carrier is engaged in yet another legal battle with its workforce amid allegations that it underpaid aircraft engineers in the US as much as $10 million. Away from equities, oil prices were flat. Gold's had a bit of a run. It's fetching around $2,055 an ounce, and the Aussie dollar is flat, buying about 67 US cents.
Okay, turning to politics now, and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has again reiterated that the government intends to proceed with already legislated Stage 3 tax cuts.
Yeah, these are the big ones due to kick in on 1 July this year. So the 32.5% and 37% tax brackets will be rolled into a single 30% tax bracket, and the threshold for the top 45% tax bracket will increase from 180,000 to 200,000. About 95% of people will be captured by this. Basically, it's middle-class tax cuts. That's effectively what they are. And welfare and charity groups in particular have called for the money to be spent elsewhere. Yesterday, the Prime Minister told ABC Radio that the cuts would go ahead. He said the government is looking at what it can do to ease cost of living pressures. But every time he says the cuts are going ahead, and remember, they have been legislated, every time he says that, it's just that little bit more difficult to backtrack on them. So it does look like these tax cuts will go through.
And Sean, Foreign Minister Penny Wong yesterday left for a visit to the Middle East, but not everyone's happy about where she will and won't visit.
That's right. Senator Wong will visit Jordan, Israel, the West Bank and the United Arab Emirates. While in Israel, she'll meet survivors of the October 7 attack and the families of hostages, as well as Palestinian victims of Israeli settler violence in Jerusalem. However, she won't visit the site of the Hamas October 7 attack in southern Israel. The Executive Council of Australian Jewry called that decision insulting and deeply concerning.
Sean, oil and gas giant Santos has received federal court approvals to go ahead with a $5.8 billion gas project off the Northern Territory coast, with the court ruling it will not endanger Indigenous cultural heritage sites.
Justice Natalie Charlesworth shut down claims by a group of Tiwi Islanders that the proposed location of the pipeline, along with the concrete beds it sits on, will damage sea country, dreaming tracks, songlines and areas of cultural significance, including burial sites and animal habitats. It means Santos can push ahead with the pipeline, which has been in limbo since September 2022. It's a big win for Santos, obviously, and comes after energy analysts have warned recently of earnings risks for Santos and Woodside Energy, the other big player in the market. They're worried, the analysts are worried about legal challenges and environmental issues facing some major projects in those companies. Yesterday's decision helped Santos' share price jump more than 4%.
Sean, there's plenty going on around the states as well. The Victorian Premier has had to defend the government's $100 million COVID-19 bailout of the Australian Open as the country's premier tennis tournament gets underway.
Premier Jacinta Allen, I'm still not used to that. I want to say Daniel Andrews every time I say Victorian Premier. We'll get there. Premier Jacinta Allen said the bailout was needed and ensured the tournament remained in Victoria. Now, last month, media revealed that the Labor government in the state forgave a $43 million loan to Tennis Australia in the depths of the pandemic. Yesterday, The Age reported that Victorian Treasurer Tim Pallas approved solvency and cash flow support payments of $62 million to the organisation so it could repay its debts. Meanwhile, in Sydney, the state's emergency service has been hit with hundreds of calls after widespread rain and flash floods in the city. The northern suburbs and beaches were among the hardest hit. In Brisbane, a Woolworths store has been vandalised with spray paint and calls for a boycott following the supermarket chain's decision to stop selling Australia Day products. And in the north of the country, a tropical low off the coast of Darwin and monsoonal rains in far north Queensland are expected to bring huge volumes of rainfall. In fact, the Bureau of Meteorology, said some areas south of Darwin could expect up to 500 mils of rain between Sunday and Wednesday this week. with widespread totals elsewhere in the region, somewhere between 200 and 300 mils. That is a lot of rain.
That is a huge amount of rain. Sean, just on the tennis bailouts, I mean, it's great work by The Age and by the media in reporting this, but isn't it alarming that we're only finding out about it now?
Yes, you would think that a state government, some sort of transparency in terms of, it was December was when we found out that they forgave the $43 million loan, which I think the loan was 2021. So that's a couple of years later, almost 3 years later, really. So, yes, I do agree. I think those sorts of things should be in the public realm.
Oh, absolutely, especially that kind of scale. Anyway, Sean, one last story. Artificial intelligence will affect almost 40% of global jobs, with advanced economies facing greater exposure than emerging markets and low-income countries, according to a new analysis by the International Monetary Fund.
Yes, the 190-member IMF works to achieve sustainable growth and prosperity, but it's not sure about AI, saying it's likely to worsen overall inequality, something policymakers need to address. Advanced economies may have about 60% of jobs affected, more than emerging and low-income countries, according to the study. AI's income inequality effect will largely depend on how much the technology complements high earners. More productivity from high-income workers and companies would boost capital returns, but that will widen the wealth gap. And the IMF called on countries to provide comprehensive social safety nets and retraining programs for vulnerable workers. I reckon, Michael, I'm putting it out there now, AI, artificial intelligence, will be a top 5 phrase on Fear and Greed in 2024.
That is a big call so early in the year, but I also think it's probably the safest possible call you could make right now, Sean.
I think so.
Really taking a risk there, aren't you? All right. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thanks, Michael.
It's Tuesday, the 16th of January, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.